Hello, I'm Mercedes Fobb here at the Captured on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We're going to paint one of Dubuque's well-known landmarks, the 4th Street elevator. Imagine we're standing on 4th Street looking up the bluff, and at the top we have that white building, the tracks coming down, the cable cars halfway up, halfway down, with the little garage at the bottom, and then to the left and to the right we're just going to have some nice green foliage. And for that we're going to have a nice, easy, fun way to do it. Let's get started with everything we're going to need. First, I'm going to have my 16 by 20 canvas resting vertically on my easel. I'm going to be using 4 paintbrushes today. My large flat tip brush, my middle-size angular brush. I'm going to call this one a bad hair day, but it's also just kind of a wore-out round tip brush. And last but not least, a really tiny brush for a tiny detail. For our colors today, we're going to have a ton of white, black, burnt sienna, green oxide, yellow, and blue. And don't forget a cup of water as well as paper towels for keeping those brushes clean as we work today. Now we'll get started. I always start with the background and paint the closest thing last. That being said, I am going to start with the sky in the far back. I'm going to start with my largest flat tip brush. And I'm going to start mixing that nice light blue sky color. So I'm going to start with at least a quarter-size scoop of white and place that in the center of my palette. Then I'm going to take a little bit of primary blue on the corner of my brush, mix that in. Keep it a nice little pile. And I'm slowly going to add blue until I get the color that I like. All right, so there it is. Now I'm going to start with drawing where I want that sky to be at the top of my canvas. I know that I want the top of my bluff to be about a third or a quarter of the way down, and I'm going to have this all centered. So I'm going to go about a third of the way down, right in the center. I'm going to start with a dot, and I'm going to go to the left and to the right just a little bit. And because I'm going to have trees kind of framing the left and the right, I'm just going to make a straight line up to this corner and up to the left corner. That is all the sky I'm going to have. So I'm just going to use nice long brush strokes to color in the top. Okay, and if you want to fancy it, you can always get a little bit of white and blend that in here and there just to kind of create soft clouds, a little bit of variation, so it's not just solid blue. And there we are. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush and then begin our next color of the background. I'm going to start with kind of a dirt color where my 4th Street elevator is going to be in the center. I'm going to still use that large brush, and it is going to be a little bit of a lighter color. So I am going to start with another big scoop of white, at least the size of a quarter. And then I'm going to take a good size scoop of the burnt sienna here and mix that in. And I always like to warm it up a little bit, so I might just take a little bit of yellow on the corner of my brush, mix that in. Okay. So this step's kind of fun. I'm just going to add in a little bit of that dirt throughout the middle. I'm going to say that my hillside's going to go about a quarter of the way up from the bottom. So I'm just going to make a mark here in the center so I know how far down I go. But then I'm going to use my brush standing up, just flick it left to the right to add in that dirt. All right, so our next step of the background is complete. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush again. For the next part of my background, I'm going to mix a nice dark green for the shadows in the trees on the left and right of where the elevator is going to go. So to mix that color, I'm going to start with a big scoop of that green oxide. I want it to be at least the size of a quarter. Again, kind of placing that wherever you have room on your palette. And I'm going to add quite a bit of black to it. Make a nice dark green, almost a hunter green. Okay, so now I'm going to use this color to fill in on the left and right of that path. So up at the top here, I'm going to start on the left. I'm just going to draw this straight line right next to my sky and continue that around the edge as well. And then I'm just going to color in this area solid to start. Just the best I can. Sometimes the color's a little see-through, that's okay. We'll have plenty to add and cover it later. So now I'm going to use the brush standing up again, flick from the left and always to the right, overlapping that path just a little bit. And after I got this other side down, I'm gonna take a step back, make sure that I got that little bit of perspective with it. So I might bring this in a little bit further on each side at the top, as it is farther away, so it's gonna appear smaller than it is down here where it's closer. And there we have it. We're gonna go ahead and clean off that brush before we do our last step of the background. And the last step is gonna be creating that nice gray for the concrete at the bottom. So again, I'm going to start with a good scoop of white, and I'm going to separate that on my palette, and then I'm going to add black this time, just a little bit. I'm kind of going for a medium gray. Trying to keep it in a nice little pile. And once you got the gray that you like, all we're going to do is draw a straight line underneath everything we just did, left and right, and then everything below that we're going to color in nice long brush stroke. And that finishes our background. We're going to make sure to let that dry before our next step. So clean off your brush and we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. I have just finished painting in the background of my 4th Street elevator painting. So now we're going to start adding some buildings. I am going to be using, again, my large flat tip brush, and the buildings are white, so there's no colors we need to prepare here. I'm just going to use the white, and I'm going to start with a little building at the bottom of the elevator. And this is going to be centered to my path, and it is going to be fairly large. I'm going to start with a couple dots. Makes it a lot easier. I'm going to start with one right at the middle bottom of my building that I want to come down into my concrete a little bit. Now I'm going to decide how tall I want that building. I would say it's going to be between 1/3 the way up and about halfway. It's kind of somewhere in there. And then I'm just going to start with a nice long brush stroke connecting the two, just so I can see the full height. And now I'm going to just work on adding some width to the left and to the right. And at the top, I'm just going to make a little bit of a roof. So just a little curve down to the left and to the right. And then I'm just going to make those walls on the left and the right as well. So basically I have a rectangle with a round top. And I'm just going to work on coloring that in. So now I'm going to go to the building at the top of the bluff. So this time I'm just going to use the width of the brush to my advantage. It's going to be exactly how tall I want the first story to be. So if I start where I want that left wall, right at the top, I'm going to drag it across until I got the width. Clean up that edge there. And then I'm going to use half the width of the brush for my second story that's not quite as wide. Coming in, a little bit of width. So there's the start of it. I'm going to just set this brush down for a moment because I'm going to go back to it for my second coat. I'm just going to use a smaller brush this time. So my middle size angular brush with the white, I'm going to add in the rooftop. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a slope out to the left and to the right, and then just kind of clean it to a nice little triangle corner. Trying to smooth out that paint. And we'll have one last rooftop right at the top. Sticks out a little bit to the left and to the right. Little angle up on each side, and then finish with a straight line across the top. Color it in. Okay, I'm done with that small brush, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that or set that in my cup of water. And while I have the big brush, I may as well just use it to prepare the green color that I want for my trees on the left and to the right. It is going to be a nice light lime green, so I'm going to start with a nice good scoop of white. And I'm going to go ahead and add yellow to it this time first. So a good scoop of yellow, mix that in. So we have a nice bright highlighter yellow. Then I'm going to take a little bit of that oxide green, just a little bit, mix that together. And there I have it. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe off all that extra paint, make sure I'm not wasting it, and set this brush aside. I'm going to be using my kind of bad hair day brush, that nice large round tip that's a little frayed, but it's okay because it works really great for this step. I'm going to use that green and basically just make a ton of scribbles throughout the trees. So I'm going to start right up at the top, making circular motions with little paint, not too much, and I want it to be kind of like the top of a cloud. So I'm going to bring it out further than that green, that dark green that I had, so that it takes away from that straight line because we don't want to see that. Then with very little paint, I'm just going to kind of fill in that area next. And then again, finishing with a little bit of grass at the bottom, angling this way and that way. Now I do notice that this green did not cover that harsh edge up there, so I can always bounce into my dark green again and just kind of swirl in a little bit of that at the top if you feel like that was the case for you as well. You can always play, bounce back and forth between the colors, make it unique. And there we have it. Got some little happy trees there. So we're going to go ahead and clean off our brush. And now I'm going to go back to my middle-size angular brush. I'm going to go ahead and start that track for my 4th Street elevator. Now this is a very scary step because there's a lot of straight lines, a lot of them. So I do like to start with a couple dots. With this brush, I am going to use some black, but I always like to water down the black a little bit. Makes that paint a little bit more fluid. So I just take that brush, dip it in the water, and then mix it together. Now there is such thing as watering it down too much, so I always like to practice a line on my palette If it's a little see-through, then you watered it down too much. So you should be able to practice. It should be a nice, clean line. I'm going to use very little black on my paintbrush here, so I'm just kind of wiping off the sides. And my first dot is going to be for that center line of my track. It's going to be centered underneath this building, right up at the top. And this line I'm going to visualize is going to come straight down until it splits. So in the middle, it's kind of like a football shape. So we're going to go down about 1/3 the way, make our next dot, or from now we can just connect those two. Then I'm going to skip a little bit of distance, maybe about 4 fingers, and continue that down to the top. And now I'm going to create the left and right side of the tracks. So up here it is going to be a lot smaller, and again I'm going to try to get wider down here. So I'm going to be maybe about a pinky's width over to the left and to the right. Trying to keep that the same distance, and down here it's maybe a little bit bigger, 2 to 3 fingers, go to each side, maybe about 1 inch. And then I'm going to draw that line kind of shooting for that lower dot, but stop at the same length. Same thing over here. And then I'm just going to visualize that it comes down and continues right here and here. So that all we have to do now is draw that football shape in the middle. So in the middle, just going to have that nice slight curve going out to the left, meeting to that bottom, and to the right, to the bottom. And then we're going to copy that same curve, sometimes I have to refine it, to the outer edges. So just kind of follow that same curve from one end to the other. Alrighty, and there we have it. Now the lines that go across do kind of help, especially if you feel like you did not have straight lines, and that's okay because it happens. But really light pressure, I'm just going to go across, add those little lines going across all the way down. And while I have that brush with the black, I may as well just go ahead and outline my buildings. And one last thing I'm going to do is just add in that black window. So using this brush, I'm going to make a rectangle just a little bit lower than this little corner here. Actually, we can just draw a straight line across. Then it's nice and easy to see where we're going. So just a little bit down, I'm going to draw a black rectangle here for that little window. Across. It's about halfway down, and then I'm just going to color it in. Long brush strokes. And once you finish that, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush, and I'm going to take a little break to make sure my tracks are dry for the next step. Welcome back to Picture This. Next step for my painting today is going to be adding the cable cars to the 4th Street elevator. I'm going to be using my middle-sized angular brush to start the cars. I'm just going to start with white. So a little bit of white. I'm just going to make a rectangle using the width of my brush, basically to do the work for me. So I'm going to make sure that my cable cars are opposite of each other. So I might just have one car up above the football shape here, using the width of my brush in the center of my track, and then I'm just going to widen it up a little bit, making sure it's a nice narrow triangle, and maybe just a little arch at the top. And I'm going to do that same thing now for the next car that's going to meet down here, but this one is going to be a little bit bigger because it's a little closer. Starting right at the edge there, bringing it up a little bit taller. And again, adding a little arch at the top. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. Now I'm going to prepare the green that I'm going to use for the trim on my cable cars as well as this close-up little building. So I am going to be using mainly this green oxide, but I know this color is really see-through, so I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. It's just going to help make it a little more opaque. And there we are. So with that middle-sized brush, I'm basically just going to make a fat outline around the walls of the cable cars and across the bottom. So just on the one side, nice straight down each side and across the bottom. And we're going to do that for each of the little cars. And that's the last of my green. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. And for the next step, I'm going to move to my really tiny brush. And this is going to be adding in the details through the cable cars and the windows in the top building there. So I'm going to take a little bit of black. And I'm actually just going to start with those windows on that top building. I'm going to add the windows on the second story. Basically just little squares or rectangles going across, and you know what, fit as many or as little as you want. It looks like I'm going to fit about 5 up there, and then I'm going to color them in. For the next step, I'm going to add in the lettering on the window that says the 4th Street Elevator. Now you can make it really nice and clean and legible, or you can make it more implied. Either way works. With a little bit of white though, I'm just going to start near the top of that window, and I'm just going to abbreviate street as well because elevator alone is a long word. So I'm just going to make it even shorter, even with the letter 4, and then the TH. Light pressure, use your best handwriting. We got ST. And then I'm going to do my best to add in elevator all the way across the bottom using cursive. And cross the T. There we have it. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush, and I'm going to go back to my middle-sized square tip, my favorite brush. Okay, I'm going to be using black again, but I do want to water it down because there is just a little bit more details I want to add to my building at the bottom here. So with the black, I'm just going to outline around the green. Light pressure, remember quick movements does help with those straighter lines. And then throughout the middle, I'm just going to add a little bit of lines to imply the siding. They can go all the way across or not, it doesn't matter. And I might outline the top of my roof just to bring it out a little bit as well. Getting those ends. And finishing with the railing going in from the left. So about halfway up, I'm just going to add that little slope of the railing and then straight down. And then across from the bottom, I'm just gonna go out a little bit further and add those spindles. Just nice long lines from top to bottom. Okay, some more details we can do with the black is add in a little bit of a partial outline to the trees. Nothing too crazy though, just kind of breaks up that light and dark green contrast. Just gonna add little bumps, just kind of highlighting some of those tree clusters. And one last thing I like to do is kind of create a line between the ground and the concrete going across. Light pressure with the brush. And one thing I did forget was in the cable cars, I do have like that little line at the bottom of the door. Just kind of breaks it up. And there we go. Oop, maybe a couple little lines over here. I think that should be everything for my 4th Street elevator. But before you think you're done, an artist always signs their work. I usually use the tiniest paintbrush, and I usually sign in the lower right corner. And I always like to date when I did it as well. Here we are. I'm going to clean my brushes. And I want to thank you for joining me, Mercedes Fabb, at the Captured on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time on Picture This.